important study. University of Illinois college student, Maggie Kendall Zimmerman. Okay, and she's, I think she was a senior at the University of Illinois, and she did a study, and then her professor, Peter Doran, added his name to it in order to get it to be published in an academic journal. I'm sure she's very proud of having gotten into an academic journal. So what did she do? Now, this is a college paper. So she did a 2-minute online survey of earth scientists working for government agencies and universities. She pulled up the list online. She did this two-question survey, sent it out, and got some responses. All right. She asked the wrong people. So these earth scientists that she was asking. So she leaves out all the solar scientists, all the space scientists, all the cosmologists, physicists, meteorologists, astronomers. I mean, these are the people who probably know something about this issue, right? And they probably know something about natural variability. These are the people who say, okay, the sun probably is influencing climate. And she systematically just leaves them out. Only 5% of the respondents self-identified as being climate scientists. She asked the wrong questions. She says, have temperatures risen? And is human activity a significant contributing factor? Now, on the first one, have temperatures risen? Yes, they have. Joe Bast, the evil denier of global warming, is telling you temperatures rose in the 20th century, second half of the 20th century. Climate is always changing. Nobody denies that, so it's going up and down. Was human activity a significant contributing factor? In science, even the social sciences, we talk about significance. A significant impact can be really tiny, but it's still statistically significant. I think there is a statistically significant impact on climate from human activity. We're emitting billions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and soot and other things that probably are having an impact on climate. We are wiping out forests, we are planting crops, we're irrigating millions of acres of crops, we're creating reservoirs where once there were just desert canyons. You think that doesn't have an impact on climate? I think it does, and it's probably measurable, which means it's statistically significant. So I would answer yes to both of these questions. Most skeptics would answer yes. She asked the wrong questions. And her 98% consensus figure actually refers to the views of only 79 climate scientists. She went through a larger number responded to her survey, so she went down to only those who self-identify as climate scientists and who are currently publishing. She randomly identifies that little group, and she says, oh my goodness, 98% of them are alarmists. You know, big surprise. That's not evidence of consensus, okay? It's not good science. It never should have been published. It's just remarkable that a peer-reviewed journal would run something like this. All right, the third paper, the third source cited in NASA's footnote is another college student paper. This one, Stanford University. William R. Love Anderegg does this paper with his professor and a couple of other academics, added their name to his little term paper and got it published. So he claims to have found that 97% of climate researchers most actively publishing in the field, maybe 79 of them again, support the UN IPCC position. He claims that the 50 most prolific alarmists were published an average of 408 times each. 98% of those 50, there we go, it's 50 this time, agree with the IPCC. So NASA, when it says 98% of currently publishing experts, it's talking about 50 scientists in this study, 79 scientists in the other study. I mean, that's fraud, I think. To not put too fine a point on it, isn't that like the definition of fraud? So what's wrong with this study? Well, he used Google Scholar. I have op-ed pieces that come up when you use Google Scholar and you type in Joseph Bast. Op-ed pieces that I wrote come up. So it's not just peer-reviewed journal articles. There's all kinds of stuff that comes up. So a lot of stuff that doesn't come up in Google Scholar. So it's a poor way to collect the database. He also just looked at abstracts because he's not really a scientist. He couldn't read the full articles. He couldn't interpret them. So he just looks at the abstracts. And as we know, abstracts are inaccurate and misleading. Being published less often does not mean a scientist or his or her views are less credible. I think it's an essential point. He just assumes, all these people assume, that if you publish 50 times, you're more credible than a guy who only publishes 5 times. I'll dwell on that maybe in a little more in a minute. Yeah. So the folks who believe global warming is a crisis were being published an average of 408 times. As I say on that slide, that's not evidence of quality. That's evidence of fraud and a broken peer review system. When I was going to college back in the 70s, I had professors, if they could get into a single peer-reviewed journal once a year, that was tenure. And that was the University of Chicago. Thank you. I mean, these were prominent scholars, and they would do 1 or 2 articles a year, and that was considered a big deal. Now you've got academics claiming to be experts on global warming being published an average of 408 times. That happens, it's astonishing, and it happens when you get 50 authors on a single article, and they're increasingly doing that. So now they gang author this stuff. So now every time one article appears, 50 guys add it to their resumes. I think that's fraudulent. And when you put all those guys on your article, how do you get peer review? All the potential peer reviewers are co-authors. Okay, it's pal review is what they call that. So it's evidence of a broken peer review system. And 98% of 50 scientists obviously is not consensus. That's just silliness again. All right, and the fourth footnote that your government agency, your NASA, relies on to make its contention that there's a consensus is the wacky Australian blogger, John Cook. This guy has a website called skepticalscience.com where all he does is attack global warming skeptics. The whole purpose of the site is to marginalize and diminish, use ad hominem attacks against global warming skeptics. He's an alarmist. He's done a book on the subject, titled, titled Climate Change Denial, Heads in the Sand. All right, doesn't exactly sound like an objective guy to me. He claims to have found 97% of articles published from 1991 to 2011 endorse the view that human activity is responsible for some warming. Okay, I agree with that. So I guess I'm part of the 97%. He's biased, so we should not trust this guy. It's another abstract counting exercise, just like Naomi Oreskes' effort. So his methodology is fundamentally wrong. Immediately after his article was published, there were tremendous pushback, which is kind of unusual in academic circles. But Legates and several co-authors wrote, they looked at the actual database. They said just 0.3% of these articles endorsed the standard definition of consensus, just 0.3. Richard Toll, who's a very prominent economist in the debate, contributor to the IPCC reports, says the main finding of the paper is incorrect, invalid, and unrepresentative. Christopher Monckton says this project was not a scientific investigation, but a public relations exercise. One of the astonishing things in that study was halfway through the study, they found that too few were being categorized as supporting the consensus. So they changed the definition of what constitutes an endorsement of the consensus to inflate the numbers. I mean, it was just so dishonest in this big controversy. If you just Google this, you're going to immediately come upon how they were misrepresenting the data, changed their methodology. It's all just biased advocacy research parading as academic research. All right, so those are the 4 footnotes that NASA uses. Those are the 4 best pieces of research they could find to support their claim of a consensus. Well, I can find a lot better evidence that shows real disagreement among scientists on global warming. And just a few of those things. A medical doctor, Klaus Martin Schulte, did a study using Oreskes' same methodology, but on a more recent selection of articles. He found that the percentage of articles that implicitly or explicitly endorse the consensus has now fallen to 45%, down from 75%. So even using her methodology, he says. Now fewer than half of the articles are actually supporting what the IPCC says. Dennis Bray and Hans von Storch, they have done maybe 4 or 5 surveys now, international surveys of climate scientists. These are really well done. These are serious surveys that are actually published in peer-reviewed journals when they're released. They ask 54 scientific questions. The most recent one asked 54 questions, like how would you rank the data that is used to estimate the effect of warming on cloud formation? How well do we understand cloud formation? How well do we understand the effect on water levels? And how good a job are we doing measuring sea level rise? You know, all stuff like that. And on those questions, about a third of them, people, the scientists who respond, are skeptics. They're saying, I think the evidence is very poor. It's not good enough to support a conclusion. We don't know what's happening with clouds. We don't have decent models that accurately track sea level rise. About a third of them are alarmist, what I call alarmists, that would support the IPCC's position. Oh yeah, we're sure of this. We know that sea level rise is increasing. We know the impact on clouds. And fully a third are right in the middle. So Bray and von Storch have people rank these things, I think, from like 1 to 7 or 1 to 8. And a third of them are giving it a 3 or a 4. And about a third are giving it a 1 or a 2. And about a third are giving it a 6 or a 7. So, I mean, that's not consensus, right? That's on its face direct evidence of a lot of uncertainty in the scientific community on the basic questions of science that you have to solve if you're going to make predictions about future climate and the impact of human activity on climate. A couple of more pieces of evidence. Verhagen et al., peer-reviewed article, found that fewer than half, about 42%, of the people in their survey agreed with the IPCC's claim to be highly confident that more than half of the modern warming is due to human activity. Without getting into the high weeds, you know, we're talking about how confident, what is the statistical probability that we're right, confidence intervals in statistics. And most scientists, they may think that there is a human impact and maybe it's a problem, but they're not confident. They're not willing to put a number on that. They're not willing to say, I'm 96% confident or something like that. The IPCC does. It almost comically says we are 96% confident. This time we're 97% confident. We're getting even more confident. It's not a scientific number. It's not math. It's it's kind of made up. It's sitting around a table saying, how do we put a number on how strongly we feel about this? You would expect no less from the United Nations. The American Meteorological Society does surveys of its members. Only 52% of its members in a survey done in 2012 believe that the warming of the past 150 years was man-made. That same survey found that only 40% believe that man-made global warming could be dangerous. Far from consensus, and meteorologists know a little bit about climate and weather. Phil Jones, some of you won't recognize the name. Phil Jones is the scientist who has the database of global temperatures. Supposedly, he's the guy, all this data comes in, he massages it, adjusts it, edits it, and then sends it out there. And this becomes the basis for claims that the global temperature has increased or decreased year after year. So he's a really big deal. He became kind of infamous during the ClimateGate scandal when emails were going back and forth. And people were saying, well, show us your data, Phil, freedom of information requests. And he refused, and he blocked, and he refused, and he blocked. Turns out he lost the original data. Original data doesn't exist. All that exists is the massaged, homogenized data, they call it. He has altered this data over and over and over again, and now we just trust Phil that he got it right, and we don't get to look at his data.